Welcome to another edition of AML Conversations. This is our August chat with Sarah Beth Felix. And Sarah Beth, among many other things, is the author of Dirty Money Weekly. And we've had the pleasure of talking to Sarah throughout 2026. Sarah, I know you've been traveling quite a bit and you've moved, and so really appreciate you taking a few minutes today. Let me start with, we didn't talk in July, but last time we talked was June. So there's been a couple things that have gone on, and you've covered a bunch, but let's just focus on a few. The first one would be, as we're recording this, yesterday, Tuesday the 12th, FinCEN issued their final rule on basically, my words, killing the Corporate Transparency Act, which we knew was coming. So we knew it was coming. 73-page document. I know you've been through it and have some views besides the obvious. I'll just start this way. It really seems to me that Europe is on a different wavelength than we are regarding beneficial ownership. I think that's clear. Also, when this rule was finalized yesterday, the administration made the big deal that this was going to solve so many small business burdens and all that sort of thing. But obviously, they are also saying in a lot of separate conversations the need for banks to look for shell companies and other illegal activity. So a little counterintuitive from my perspective. But what was your take, both in general, because we knew it was coming, and then operationally, a bank calls you up and says, what do I do? What do I not do going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what you just said, the shell companies is front of mind for me. It like every time we get an advisory and alert guidance that comes out from FinCEN, the term shell companies is found at least once, if not a half dozen times. And even from the same body that said that the CTA does not help national security at all. That same body also says out of the other side of their mouth that all the CJNG, all of the cartels that they've listed, all function with shell companies. And so, I mean, for me, it's just kind of like a whiplash moment. Yes, we knew that that there was going to be, this was going to be the death of it. But it doesn't make reconciling those two things any easier. So I think from an operational perspective, which is where I try to live, because I can't make sense. I'm not a politician. I can't make sense of why these things are decided. I'm very opinionated, clearly. But I think from an operational perspective, it puts the burden in an indirect manner on financial institutions and some non-bank financial institutions to detect shell companies that are in the U.S. And that is very, very, very difficult because it's very nuanced. It's not this like a shell company looks like X or Y.
Right.
It's a whole bunch of things. Some of them can be, set up in a rule, but it's not 100%. So then you're going to deal with false positives. So there's still a lot of fallout from this. And I think, because financial institutions, and, they didn't actually come out and say this directly, but I think everyone talks kind of around it, that financial institutions are already collecting beneficial owner information at new accounts or for new accounts. And that information is available for different agencies, the ones that would have access to the BOI database or whatever it was called, the BOI one. I think that is an assumption that is difficult for financial institutions to reconcile, because it's like, okay, great. So now we are again the proxy arm of the government to collect this information, even though it's different than all of the data that would have triggered it and would have been collected inside the BOI database. It still is something, but it still puts the burden on financial institutions that at some point have to make a profit. So it's just kind of like lumping all of this stuff back down onto financial institutions instead of the government requiring it, businesses providing that type of data, and then agents are able to ping that database. Right now, there were lots of other issues with the CTA. There were other things I didn't like about it. It doesn't matter now. But I think from an operational perspective, anytime a SAR is written, you must include the beneficial ownership data that you collected on that business in the backup documentation. I think that's the way that we can best support the agents that are going to be missing this valuable data because the database, the CTA got the axe. So, for me, if our whole focus in this is to provide highly useful, timely data to our law enforcement partners, that's one of the ways that we can do it, is put that in the narrative when you list your backup documentation so that it's available through a simple request and not through necessarily the subpoena long process. Also, the second thing would be looking for shell companies. I know I just said it's not fair for banks to have that burden, but I think even from just a monitoring suspicious activity standpoint, financial institutions are kind of left in the dark with what is a shell company? What does that look like in my data, in my customer base? And I get probably 3 to 5 requests a week through LinkedIn and email. Some people even find my phone number and they text me and ask me for the shell company indicator list. And it's not an all-encompassing one. It certainly should be added to over time as we find different ways that they can find a shell or a front company. There's actually 2 different tabs on this in the workbook. So if there's a financial institution or a non-bank financial institution that's listening and you're like, I don't even know how to start looking for a shell company, just ping me and I'll send it to you. I'm not sending it to consultants. I'm just sending it to the actual practitioners who need at least a step 1 or a step 2 of how to find these.
And you said this up front, but we didn't say it specifically. The CDD rule has not gone away. So in terms of banks seeing this as a elimination of burden, and burden's the wrong word, elimination of obligations, that's really not true, as what you've just talked about. The other part of it is, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit, it excludes from the final rule the exempted entities that are domestic, but not foreign. So what are some of the things that you would look for with a foreign company that then decides, well, as long as I can go to Montana or Nevada or Delaware, I can circumvent this rule? Maybe that's too simplistic of an example, but is that a potential issue?
Oh, yeah. I think the cheapest state I could find, because I like to test these with different states, what I call our onshore, offshore states, and I've been testing these for years. And the cheapest option I can find is $125, and I can be a non-US person. I actually set my VPN to be outside of the US in some higher risk countries, and I go to their Secretary of State sites, and I see how far I can get in a customer or in a corporation formation process. And, a couple of them will require a physical person in that state, but that's a mere $50 in some states, like Wyoming. I can find someone who is the physical person in that state that lives in a trailer. There was an article years ago, I think with Wired, that I was quoted in, where they, went and found this lady who had a trailer out on a farm, and that was her job. She was the natural person in that state, which is the only thing you really need in some of these onshore offshore states. So one of the things to look for, and this is going old school, and people aren't going to like this because everyone thinks that everything should be 0-1 byte format and AI. But in the corporation formation documents that are provided at account opening, if you see generic, what I like to call formation mill documents, right? You know how we have like puppy mills? Well, these are formation mills, right? These are the registered agents, conglomerates of the world that just churn and burn these corporate documentation showing that this company was started in this state. When you see those types of gatekeepers, that to me is one of the triggers that it could be a shell company. But we have gotten away from that. I mean, 20 years ago, we were looking at these formation documents going, well, this person says this, and it says this about the business, and it says this person owns this part and this person doesn't. We were actually in that data. We're so far away from that. We have people in the new deposits department that has no financial crime training, no shell company training, that are looking at these documentations, if they're even looked at all, from that type of perspective. So I would say kind of go old school a little bit. Like if you're finding companies in your transactional data and your alerts where you're like, this does not make sense. I cannot find this company anywhere online. They don't have a website presence anywhere. How are they making this much money, right? That's like the reasonableness flag that I have for shell companies. Like, how can anyone find them for them to make this much money if there's no presence, that they can find on the internet? So for me, that next step should be, let's go look at their corporate formation documents that they gave us. Is this a formation mill, right, where they're just churning these out? And that's where it's so easy for a non-US person to, from outside the US, get a US company and totally circumvent what this CTA, or what's left of the CTA, for foreign businesses and foreign persons. There is no need for an illegitimate foreign company to actually register. So really the only thing that we're going to see is that the legitimate foreign companies are going to be the ones that register and give their data. Right. It's going to be all of the illicit ones that magically show up as a U.S. person and a U.S. company for $125. I mean, that is talk about zero friction.
Hey, if you're looking about some opportunity for business, it seems like a good investigative firm could say, hey, we'll sell you a business that'll help you track these foreign companies that are now domestic. So that's, it's, you got to look at that side of this too, right?
Yep.
So,
yeah.
Let's shift. You spent some time talking about Wise. They got a penalty. I think it was from CFPB, but you'll have to correct me. But they are a financial tech firm. Talk a bit about that and some of the takeaways that you wrote about regarding the Wise situation that I thought were very relevant to today's decisioning by companies that need to figure out that there needs to be an AML infrastructure if you're a financial tech firm. And I think that's a pretty good example. Talk a bit about the Wise situation.
Yeah, so their penalty was from CSBS and California DFPI. Okay. And it was pretty, it certainly wasn't big enough to make, a splash to get people like, oh yeah, well, they really mean business, meaning we need to burn it all down and rebuild it. That's not what happened. And again, this is my reading between the lines. Sure. I could be totally wrong, but I haven't been wrong yet in how I'm reading between the lines on a lot of these things. It eventually comes out. But, I kind of see it as a recurring theme, which is, and no one ever actually says this in any of these meetings, but it's a theme of, well, we didn't get in that much trouble, or we didn't get in any trouble, therefore we're okay as is. And that to me means that they're resting their future on whether or not they got criticized in their last regulatory review. And that's always dangerous. And we saw this throughout the last administration, where financial institutions particularly were like, well, the Fed or OCC hasn't had any issues every year, and they've been in here, we are good to go. And they kind of take that as a future indicator of success. And I think that is so wrong. I think, that you have to look at what you're doing, regardless of whether or not you're going to get criticism or an order or an MRA or anything like that. and looking at your past and saying, well, they didn't have any problems, so we are, business as usual, good to go. We don't have to change anything. That is a wrong benchmark, right? Your benchmark should be what is required of us today, during this type, during this threat landscape that we have, what is required of us today. And I did not see that. And while the OCC, while their letter was nice but firm, I kind of felt like when I was reading between the lines that really was the core of the issue that Wise missed. One of the things I loved that the OCC said, and I love this, and for me, this should be copied and pasted in every single board presentation, whether or not you are a Fed bank or a credit union. And if you feel like you don't have the right partners, the right voices, the right ears in the board, it's probably because your board and your management, they don't have any type of financial crime background at all. Operationally, regulatory wise, nothing. And that was something that the OCC clearly stated, that the organizers of this bank did not have directors or management folks with any type of financial crime background. And when I read that, I was like, hallelujah, that is amazing. Like, finally, somebody put that in writing, and that should be the standard. It should have been the standard, and that's something that our bank, our de novo bank in Vermont, very early on, like years and years ago, when Damon and I first started down this path, he asked me what it would take to be successful, and I said, we have to be serious. We have to have a board spot, if not two, and a true chief for financial crime. And we do. I am on the board, and we have Dennis, who's also on our board. And
that's Dennis Lormel, former head of
yeah.
TFOS. Yeah, right.
And and that to me shows our regulators we are serious. We are looking across all of the threats, all of the risks, to make sure that this is not a weak function. And that only happens if you have somebody who knows the right questions to ask at the board level and at the management level. And that to me was their kind of big failure. But that right there to me is a symptom of being comfortable because your regulators didn't have an issue with you. And it's like, well, why stir things up? Why go find a new board member who may have financial crime background? And they didn't do it because they're comfortable. So to me, the reason why the OCC said that they had an issue with this is more of a symptom, not the problem. The problem is they got comfortable because they never really had any major issues. I think the other thing, and this is going to sound like I'm critical, surprise, of the U.S. regulatory structure, but I think one of the things that their legal team didn't expect was the differences in what is required of them in the US versus what is required of them in the UK and in the EU. Because we do have less requirements than our peer nations when it comes to money service businesses and financial technology companies, right? We are number one in the world for fintech startups, and not for a good reason. And I talk about this is my hill, talk about all the time. But I think that was another thing where Wise was kind of like, well, this isn't required of us because of XYZ in the US. And they just kind of went, well, whatever. And I think that came back to bite them in the end, because banks are regulated completely differently than money service businesses and fintechs.
Yeah, you've talked about that quite a bit. I think you also mentioned in your write-up about the number of examiners for money transmitters is so woefully underserved, to say the least. Yeah. And as we continue to watch the exodus of federal regulatory staff here in this during this administration, it's going to get even worse. You have less people. I mean, just do the numbers. I mean, it's not a question of is the oversight proper? Is it too far? That sort of thing. It's less people. So you're not going to have the expertise. And I don't want to say you've never had it for money transmitters, but you've never had a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
So.
No, I mean, we have, I think just barely 100 for over 30 1,000 non-bank financial institutions. That is impossible. And my hat is off to those BSA
Yes.
examiners, because they have a huge job. And it's not, it's something that no one ever talks about, and then therefore it doesn't get funded. So it's like, yes, we have money service businesses. And of course, this is going to creep into my FATF view, because the FATF doesn't look under that rock. They
Right.
go, oh, you regulate money service businesses. And I'm like, yeah, but you need to ask the second question. The second question is, how often do you regulate them? Oh,
Sure.
only once every 5 years. Oh, why? Oh, it's because you don't staff it. Like, to me, it's like a cascade or a waterfall of questions that should happen. And it doesn't. It just goes, well, I mean, I'm sure that the questions get asked, but I don't think it makes it to the report. So.
Before I hit the last topic, I have another issue. We didn't talk about this before recording, but I am really curious of your take. Capital One, week or two ago, responded a court case in Florida. They're being sued by the Trump organization for debanking over 300 accounts. I'm not asking you to weigh in on whether that was appropriate, inappropriate, what have you, but Capital One said we absolutely did exit those relationships based on our analysis that there was potential money laundering going on. But my question is not about that. I think it's pretty clear that the trade associations are woefully quiet on this. It drives me crazy, because I spent many, many years at one of them, and I would be out talking about this, and they're not doing that. But here's the issue from an operational or a more personal level. They also want the names of the investigators and the staff, and Capital One is definitely responding to that, saying we are not providing that, because as we both know, as everybody knows, once those names are out in the ether, it becomes a safety question. So, if you're going to be charging your staff with analyzing alerts, making decisions on filing SARs, and then there's the potential that your name, your division can be identified. Again, we shouldn't forget entirely, but let's forget about the content of the rationale for why the case is going forward and why Capital One is opposing it. But just that, I mean, you deal like I do with a lot of people that work in that space, and that's got to be more than a scary proposition, right?
Yes, and I think the underlying problem for me, take the politics, take the parties out of it,
Right.
is that the financial institution's job is to find anomalies and in a behavior and transactions, and do analysis and investigations to see if it rises to the level of reporting a SAR.
Right.
That is their job. Their job is not, yes, this company or this person is definitely involved in XYZ. Now, a narrative may have that type of strong writing, because that's the coaching that is given to financial institutions. Like, hey, just take a stand and tell us what you think is going on. But it shouldn't be discoverable. Nobody should actually know that SARs are being written. Like, this is the problem, right? This is the beginning of the problem. Nobody should actually be knowing that a SAR was written. But I think the issue is that they're taking an investigation as an indictment.
Right.
And that, like, no one's doing that. Like, nothing came out of that, at least that I know. Nothing like came out of that, and charges were, it's not like your typical timeline of SAR to court case, right? Which is kind of what we always talk about. But that didn't happen.
Not yet. That's right.
Yeah. Yes. But and that's where it's a real dangerous time to ask for that type of identifying information. That analyst is doing their job. They're doing what is in their job description, what they have to do. If they don't do that, then they get canned. And so it's like, you are not supposed to look at the name and go, oh, I'm filing on this person because of their name. No. That's that is regardless of the name, right? So I read the court documents on Pacer, and I just
Same.
Yeah.
All right, let's stay with another controversial issue. This is I'm quoting here from an OCC posting. There was an event in Arizona, I think at Arizona National Bank, where the Treasury Secretary Bessent and Gould from the OCC participated with bankers to talk about a number of issues. But this is what the OCC is short. This is what they posted based on one of Gould's comments. Banks have an existing and longstanding obligation to know their customers. Under Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's leadership, the OCC is implementing President Trump's order, which we've talked about before, to restore integrity to America's financial system and remind banks of the credit risk associated with lending to illegal aliens. I am interested in your overall take, but I'm not interested in your take from an immigration standpoint. But you do so well in covering the operational challenges that your clients and prospective clients have. From an operational standpoint, if you're an AML professional or a business line person and you see both the executive order and the statements from the secretary and Gould and the other agencies, what are you to do in terms of both training, and what are some of, if there are, what are some of the obstacles operationally to do what they're suggesting? I mean, it's not a mandate, but certainly an executive order holds some weight with examiners. So I'm calling you up saying, Sarah, what do we do?
Oof. Okay, so I did read both statements from Bessent and Gould on this, and my mind immediately went to, it's not as easy as they say, right? Because the indicators of somebody's citizenship, it's not that they hand it to you at account opening and it says, I may or may not be a citizen.
Right.
It is up to the financial institution to find it. And yes, months ago, they gave us the pattern, right? If it's this number in this spot in the tin, then it could be a non-resident alien or resident alien. The data that is used behind the scenes, typically in a lending core and a bank core, that look at it to see whether or not that social and that date of birth are even close to each other, could indicate an illegal immigrant that received, right, that thought they were getting, a real 10 and they were given someone else's, right? Identity theft, that type of thing. All of those indicators are in all these different departments, and the financial crime expert does not have access to all of those for the most part. It lives in the deposit core, it lives in the lending. Now we also know there's a huge, very thick Chinese wall between lending and AML. They don't ever talk. They should talk, but they don't. And so I think saying, yes, you need to know your credit risks with illegal immigrants, the steps to do that are almost impossible. So what I would say to people is get to know what system is running through your core, lending core and banking core. What indicators are they looking at? And by they, I mean the check systems, EWSs of the world that run typically without anyone directing them. And then all of these reports typically go to a deposit person, not to a financial crime person or a fraud person. So there could be some indicator of a non-US person or non-US citizen getting a loan, but you have to figure out whether or not that's in your deposit core or in your lending core. So there's the first big thing. The second thing is that it's a moving target. Like states have different thresholds by which you can prove U.S. citizenship in order to get an ID. And so you have to know your state regulations, which is, again, another job for AML officers to be experts at. It's insane, right? They have to know chemical things. They have to know, crude oil versus non-crude oil. Like they have to know all of these things. Oh, and then now you have to know what are the steps that your state or your county require in order for somebody to have a general view that they are a U.S. citizen. I think somebody walks in with a driver's license from a state, most people are not going to say, are you a U.S. citizen? They're just going to assume, because most driver's license, not every driver's license counter in every state requires citizenship or a proof of citizenship of some kind, but not all of them, only part of them. So, I mean, to me, it's almost an impossible task, other than looking at the formatting of the 10 and the 9 and the 8 and the fourth spot or whatever it is, I can't remember. But even that is not 100% accurate, because you will have illegal immigrants that have somebody else's social, but you don't know it's somebody else's social because that red flag is buried somewhere in your core lending reports.
Right.
So I know it's a lot, but it's not, it's very, very difficult. That's not very helpful, but it's true.
No, it's helpful. It's going to be interesting to see what the examiners say, if anything, when they come during a regular exam to look at credit or account opening processes, if it's based at all on these comments and executive orders. To your point, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, are they going to write something up in the manual? We all know that manual needs to be
Oh, yeah.
totally rewritten, and it's not the fault of the agencies, all the changes that have occurred. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating. A quick aside, an anecdote that I'm sure you're familiar with. This is more a comment about staffing at the TSA, but a good friend of ours is traveling from Puerto Rico to Florida and was told, oh, and she showed her Puerto Rican license. Oh no, you need a passport. And she said, no, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, folks, you know. So I think it's going to be.
When I lived in Guam a lot too. They were like, "Oh, well, you." I'm like, "No, I don't. I'm going through Hawaii to Guam. Guam is yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah, that's crazy." Well, I think one of the things that on your point about what regulators are going to expect,
right?
You know, for a long time, they would ask for lists of your non-resident aliens at like for their their pre-exam requests.
Yeah. Yep.
And they would ask for that. But a list of non-resident aliens is not going to get you a list of illegal immigrants. That's not the same thing. And they're two totally different approaches. So I think it will be interesting to see if they start adding that to their exam documentation request list.
We'll be back chatting on this one again, I'm sure. So, Sarah, thank you. I know you've been traveling quite a bit, as we mentioned up front, also moving and all the things that go along with that. So I know you got a very busy fall coming up, but thanks for your time. And folks, if you haven't already subscribed, Dirty Money Weekly is free. And Sarah posts that on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to it from there. And as she's already said, she's very responsive to people that send her notes on LinkedIn as well. And also when there's a court case, there's enforcement action, whatever, almost always, if it touches in this space, Sarah's got a take, and they're always valuable. So thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.